You've felt this before. You open a blank document, you stare at it, and nothing comes. Not because you don't know what to say, but because asking AI feels easier than thinking. So you ask, it answers, you edit a little, you move on. And later, hours later, maybe days, you notice something. Your brain feels slower, quieter, like a muscle you forgot to use. That's not burnout, that's not distraction. That's what happens when thinking becomes optional. Here's the truth. AI doesn't make you dumber, but the way we often use it can. Not because it's bad, not because you're lazy, but because every time you offload a thought, you're training your brain that effort is unnecessary. And your brain listens, it adapts, it optimizes. It stops reaching for answers you can just ask for. Today, we're going to walk through what's actually happening inside your head when you use AI. Not the technology, the psychology. Because once you see it, you'll understand why that feeling isn't paranoia. It's real. Here's how it starts. You have a task, writing an email, structuring an argument, solving a problem. Normally your brain would do this. It would pull from memory, make connections, test ideas. But now there's a shortcut. You ask AI, it gives you the answer. You take it. This is called cognitive offloading. You're transferring the mental work to an external system. And in the moment it feels efficient, because it is. But here's what you don't notice. Every time you offload, your brain learns that thinking is optional. It stops activating the neural pathways that used to fire automatically. Not because you're lazy, because your brain is efficient. And efficiency means don't do work you don't have to, which leads to the next problem. Thinking is hard. Not complicated hard, friction hard. You sit with a problem, you turn it over, you hit dead ends, you backtrack, you try again. That resistance is where the work happens. But AI removes it. You don't sit with uncertainty anymore. You don't wrestle with a half-formed idea. You just ask, and it resolves. And your brain starts to expect that. It starts to treat resistance as a bug, not a feature. So when you face a problem and AI isn't there, you don't push through the friction. You just stop. Because your brain has been trained to wait for the answer to arrive. And when it doesn't, you feel stuck. But you're not stuck, you're just out of practice. Which brings us to something more subtle. Here's a question. When was the last time you weren't sure about something you wrote? Not wrong, just uncertain. That feeling, the gap between what you think and what you know, that's where judgment lives. But AI doesn't have that gap. It gives you answers that sound complete, confident, finished. And when you use those answers, you skip the part where you decide if you actually believe them. You're not building confidence in your own thinking, you're borrowing confidence from the output. And over time, that changes how you evaluate ideas. You stop asking, does this make sense to me? You start asking, does this sound right? And those are not the same question. One requires judgment. The other just requires pattern recognition, which is exactly what happens next. Let's say you're writing something. You used to start with a blank page. No structure, just ideas. You'd organize them, rearrange them, figure out what you were trying to say. Now, you ask AI for an outline. It gives you one. Introduction, 3 points, conclusion. You follow it. And it works. It's clean. It's logical. But here's what you've lost. You didn't have to figure out what structure makes sense for this idea. You didn't have to discover the shape of your own argument. You just recognized a pattern that felt right. That's pattern fluency. Your brain sees something familiar and tags it as good. But fluency isn't understanding. It's recognition. And the more you rely on it, the less you practice actual thinking. You become very good at identifying what sounds smart, and very bad at generating it yourself. Which leads to something quieter. Think about the last time you went down a rabbit hole. Not doom scrolling. Real curiosity. You read something. It made you wonder. So you looked deeper. You found more questions. You kept going. That's what curiosity feels like. Now think about using AI. You ask a question. It gives you an answer. And you stop. Not because the answer is perfect, but because it's sufficient. You don't wonder what else there is. You don't follow the thread. Because AI gives you closure. And closure ends curiosity. Your brain learns, questions have answers. Answers are final. But real thinking doesn't work that way. Real thinking is iterative, messy, open-ended. And when you stop practicing that, you stop wanting it. You become satisfied with the first answer, and that satisfaction is the problem. Because it's not that you found the truth, it's that you stopped looking. Which brings us to the final piece. Here's the thing nobody talks about. You don't notice when you've become dependent, because it doesn't feel like dependence, it feels like efficiency. You're not addicted to AI, you're just using a tool. But then something happens. You try to write without it, and it's harder than it used to be. You try to solve a problem on your own, and it takes longer. Not because you've gotten worse, but because your brain has reallocated resources. It's optimized for a world where AI is always there. And when it's not, you feel the absence. That's not a bug. That's how brains work. They adapt to the environment. And if the environment has a shortcut, they take it. So now, without AI, you feel slower, less capable, dumber. But you're not dumber. You're just out of shape. And that's the part you can fix. So here's what we've covered. Using AI offloads your thinking. It removes resistance. It substitutes confidence. It replaces understanding with pattern recognition. It kills curiosity. And it creates dependence. Not because AI is bad, but because your brain is efficient. And efficiency, left unchecked, erodes the things that make thinking worth doing. So here's the shift. Stop using AI to think for you. Start using it to think with you. Let it draft, but you decide. Let it suggest, but you evaluate. Let it fill the gaps, but don't let it erase the friction. Because that friction, the resistance, the uncertainty, the effort, that's not a problem to solve. That's where your mind lives. If this made you think differently about how you're using AI, consider subscribing. We're here to explain that technology is shaping your future without hype, fear, or noise. See you in the next one.